Hey everyone, I just wanted to pop on here to let you know about a freebie that's on offer because my little team and I decided to go ahead and offer the Boundaries Breakthrough mini course for free. I don't know how long we're going to do this, but I do know it's available right now. So if you are a compassionate person and you'd love better boundaries or you'd love a practical introduction into a radically different way to approach boundaries, I think you'll love it. And you can always add on the colorful workbook too if you want. For right now, though, the mini course is free and it's yours if you want it. So go to boundary.com, that's boundaried with a D, boundary.com/breakthrough, and you can get it. And with that, enjoy this week's episode. You are listening to We Are the Compassionate Revolution. I'm your podcast host, therapist, author, boundaries guide, Molly Moon. If you are a compassionate person and you want to know your worth, set better boundaries, live from your truth, and operate in your fullness, then I am so glad you've joined us. You ready? Let's get started. Codependency. What happens when you've been trained to understand yourself through the lens of your relationship to someone else, when your worth depends on how that other person feels about you, when your energy is devoted to their needs, their wants, their preferences, or when your sense of self rises and falls with the state of the relationship. Did you know there's a word for that? It's called codependency. Maybe you've heard that word before. Maybe someone's called you codependent. We're going to be talking about codependency in this episode and probably in the next few episodes as well, because there's a lot I want to pack in. Because codependency is one of the most common pitfalls out there for compassionate people. So I want to start with giving you a little history lesson about how the word codependency came to be. Because this word is fairly common out there in pop psychology, but many of us aren't really 100% sure what it means or where in the world it even came from. Did you know that the term first emerged in the context of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a 12-step peer support program for recovery for addiction? Back then, as AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, is coming into being, honestly, you should have seen the state of addiction treatment, as in there really wasn't any. It was just amazing that anyone was even focusing on folks who were struggling with addiction. And Alcoholics Anonymous gets credit for that. Now, some folks love AA, some don't, but whatever your opinion is, AA was at the forefront of realizing, hey, there are key behaviors. There is this certain set of traits, a cluster of traits that show up in almost everybody struggling with addiction after a certain point. You know, all these people might have been different before addiction got a hold of them, but once addiction gets a hold of them, it changes their personality. And it's true. For example, you can be the most amazing person in the world. You can be kind and considerate and caring. But as addiction takes hold, there is this line. And when addiction really takes hold, almost everybody becomes very self-centered, very selfish. Because that's just what addiction does. Selfishness is not your actual personality trait, but you get a human hooked on either alcohol or addictive drugs, and the drugs or the booze will cause a self-centeredness. Why? Because life becomes all about getting the next fix. Addiction actually rewires the brain so that the brain will put the substance first, and first out over everything, over your kids, even if your real self would never do that. And those of you listening who are in recovery, you know what I'm talking about. What was your personality like in addiction versus what are you like now? Most of the time, it's like you were a different person then, because addiction takes you away from your true self. Well, as folks were studying addiction treatment and realizing, there's this whole cluster of symptoms around this thing called addiction. And that was huge. And then they began researching ways to try to find the best methods of helping people. And as they did that, they began working with the whole family. And when they started working with the whole family, they began noticing another cluster of symptoms that kept showing up. Only this time, it's not in the person with addiction, it's in their spouses or in the parents of adult children who are addicted. These spouses, these families, these partners, they come from all walks of life, yet they are a lot of alike. They seem to have their own patterns of unhealthy relating. They love the person struggling with addiction. They want to see the person struggling with addiction get help, and yet in a weird way, sometimes they're actually part of the problem. And they don't even want to be. But they are enabling, they are over-helping, or they have completely lost their sense of self in this whole process of trying to figure out what to do with their loved one's behavior. Did you know that codependency wasn't actually the first term that was used? It didn't exist yet. The initial term for this problem was co-alcoholic. Co-alcoholic was the term that was used in the 40s all the way through the 60s. And co-alcoholic was pretty much always used for the spouse of the alcoholic, which was almost always wives at the time. And then in the 60s and 70s, the word started to be used in the clinical setting as well. And the way they understood it was, they said, the alcoholic is addicted to the booze, but the partner is addicted to the other person's addiction or addicted to the other person's problem. If you're cringing here, don't worry, I am too, because that was a pathologizing way to see it in a lot of ways. In that it was viewed as somebody whose identity and functioning is dependent on the other person's dysfunction. Some folks actually taught that the wife needed the husband to be an addict, to be dysfunctional, and that the wife would actually sabotage the recovery process of the husband because the wife had derived or was deriving her sense of worth from the husband being impaired, and thus, because the husband was impaired, the husband needed her in order to make it in this world, which made her feel good, so she didn't actually want him to get better. And that's really cringy, knowing what we know now. Now, does that actually happen where a person needs the other person to stay in addiction and will sabotage their efforts to heal and change? Yes, it does. I have seen it happen. But it's really not the norm. And it's not the norm for spouses of addicts. I always feel really bad for the spouses that got treated like that because I think that would be so hard. I mean, it would be hard, wouldn't it? You finally get your partner into a recovery program. Then you're told there that you're to blame because you must have subconsciously needed your spouse to be an addict in order for you to feel okay about yourself. It might be true for some people, but I hate it when truths get overgeneralized because then that truth, that lowercase t truth, ends up doing a lot more harm than good because that is not a helpful concept when it's misapplied. Because in most cases, the spouse is actually a victim of the addiction. And the spouse does not need to end up getting treated like they're the culprit. But back then, there was still a lot of blame and shame in everything. It was a lens that many people saw the world through, surrounding addiction, mental health, all those things. There was still a really rigid either or, black or white way of thinking. So they were looking for who's to blame, and they were trying to find culprits and go after them to try to solve the problem. So given the context, I still give AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, the benefit of the doubt there. I say they were doing the very best they could to figure out something that they were honestly trailblazers on. You know, they were farther than everybody else. Nobody else was even thinking about that yet. I have a lot of respect for Alcoholics Anonymous for that reason. Nobody was touching addiction when they started, and they went for it. They did the best they could. And they brought in the spouses and the families as best as they could. And it's always easy to criticize anything after the fact, you know, hindsight's 20/20, but I just personally would like to thank them for how they tried, because they got the ball rolling. So I think the history lesson's fun and interesting, a little cringy, but also it's nice to give gratitude where gratitude's due. The term was eventually changed from co-alcoholic to codependent. And that happened in the late 70s and 80s. And this is especially because as addictions to things like heroin, started to really be on the rise, it soon became clear alcoholism is only one type of addiction. There's a lot of substances to be dependent on. So the term codependent captured the idea of a more generalized dependency issue. But again, though, the term, was referring to one person in the relationship is dependent on a substance, and the spouse is also dependent, not on the substance, but around the other person who is dependent on the substance. And finally, the term more as we know it today, the term was expanded further in the 80s and 90s, and that was especially through the work of Melody Beattie, the author of Codependent No More. And I always wonder how to say her last name. Is it Beattie? Is it Beattie? I don't know. Beattie. She was a badass. Codependent No More was a great book, and that's when the term spread into popular psychology. The term codependent began to describe anyone who consistently sacrifices their own needs, their identity, their boundaries in a relationship, not just when partnered with someone who has an addiction. And codependency no longer became tied to needing the other person's dysfunction. That belief finally went away, and good thing. Because I know for myself, and for 99% plus of all the compassionate people I have ever worked with who have struggled with codependency, the desire was for the other person to heal, change, and get better. There was no desire for the other person to stay dysfunctional. There was no active efforts to sabotage the other person's recovery in any way. The dysfunction of the other person was causing so much pain. To be told that you want the other person to remain unhealthy is such a slap in the face of someone who's desperate for their partner or family member or loved one to change. So I'm glad that's gone. Now, I like the term codependent sometimes. What's funny is I really like using the term. I find the term very helpful to use before we get into a deep boundaries work, but I don't actually use that term much at all inside my boundaries program. Because once we get into deep boundaries work, codependency becomes a moot issue. The symptoms of codependency organically decrease as we find our true boundaries. So there's no point in focusing on it deeply once we finally begin our boundaries journey. But I do think it can be a really helpful term to use before we get into boundaries work. And that's why I want to talk about it here. And if you're taking notes, you might want to write this down. To me, this is my definition of codependency. Codependency is a word for a cluster of symptoms that will occur if you are a compassionate person who doesn't know where your boundaries are. Codependency is a word for a cluster of symptoms that will occur to varying degrees if you are a compassionate person who does not know where your boundaries are. And again, if this is your first time here, let me just say this. If you are an other-centered person, if you are naturally centered on others, that is not a bad thing. If you are a kind or empathic or highly responsible person who is attuned to others, that is wonderful. But without an awareness of your boundaries, those beautiful traits of yours are going to give you problems in your relationships, especially when you're with people who will take advantage of them. And if your sense of self is connected to that other person, if your sense of self is connected to the state of the relationship, that means when the relationship is struggling, you are struggling. When the relationship is up, you are up. And when the relationship is down, you are down. And if the other person is abusive or controlling or emotionally volatile or unstable, you are really in for a roller coaster. Because even with boundaries, it can be challenging at times to be with someone who is relationally difficult to be with. Not everybody, knows how to play nice in the same sandbox. But if you don't have any boundaries at all, and if you're compassionate and you are attached to that other person, and now your sense of self is connected to their mood, oh my goodness. Buckle your seatbelt, get a neck brace. This is going to hurt. And I'm not pathologizing you. We are in a dominant culture that does not set us up for a sense of our true boundaries. So most of us are just making it up as we go because we don't know. And we come pre-wired to care about other people. We come pre-wired to consider their needs as important. We come pre-wired to notice their emotional well-being, to notice their physical well-being. We come pre-wired with this way of approaching people that says, hey, I see you. I give a shit about you, which is really good. If I just described you, please give yourself a big hug right now, because that is precious. As in, you are a treasure in this world. You are medicine in this world. We humans as a collective, those things I just described, those are human traits that need strengthened and nourished and brought forth in humans at large. And look at you. You don't even need those traits strengthened in you. You come prepackaged with them already at a strong rate. I wish we had more of that in this world. You think about pretty much every social or political issue going on. If most humans had a, I see you and you matter and let's find a way to make this work for all of us energy about them. If they had that as a way of approaching life, oh my goodness, there wouldn't be much left to fight about, would there be? We could build a beautiful world with that attitude. In short, we need more of you. But the thing is, you aren't going to be here to help. You're not going to be able to show and model and live those traits and all of their juicy wonderfulness, those traits that can help change the world, because you're too busy getting your soul sucked out because you're living without your true boundaries. So codependency becomes the norm. Again, not pathologizing, because guess what? It's the norm for most of us. Most of us who come with these beautiful traits but don't know our boundaries, we are set up to experience codependent relationship dynamics. Unless, there's one caveat here, unless you get totally lucky and happen to get yourself in a relationship with somebody who is also compassionate and considerate and kind and caring. And if that happened to you, I am so glad. There are compassionate people in this world who would be in incredibly difficult relationship dynamics, but they lucked out and the other person also happens to be compassionate. So even though we aren't ever taught our true boundaries, we don't get a sense of our true boundaries in this dominant culture, we can escape the worst of it simply out of luck of the draw. But if you happen to be in a close relationship, and I'm talking about romantic partnerships, friendships, work relationships, family members, if you happen to be in a close relationship with somebody who wants there to be a power imbalance, they like that. They want to have control. They don't want you to have it. Or if they prefer to be a taker while you stay the giver, if they prefer to have you revolve around their needs, or if they like having you working for their acceptance and approval, then you're going to find yourself in a heap of trouble. Because codependent dynamics will result, and the miserable side effects of codependency will be experienced primarily by you, not so much for the other person. Now, codependent dynamics aren't good for the other person. It's not good for someone to be a taker. It's not good for their overall growth. It's not good for their character development. It's definitely not good for their relationship building skills. Codependency is not good for them either, but they're not really feeling the pain of it, are they? Who's really feeling the pain of codependent dynamics? You. The negative outcomes are not fairly dispersed when it comes to codependency. You get the negative outcomes of the dynamic in a much more direct way. But if we don't know what codependency is, and if we don't know we could even have boundaries, then it's so confusing. What is going on in the relationship? We're so miserable, but why? And it doesn't make sense to us because here we are loving, giving, caring. Aren't those good things? Isn't that supposed to make a relationship work? So why does it hurt? We can't figure out why we're hurting so badly. When you're a caring person who is naturally other-centered and you do not have healthy boundaries, there is a natural cluster of symptoms that will result. And that cluster of symptoms is called codependency. And codependency results, unfortunately, in a great deal of pain, hurt, confusion, emotional misery, relational problems, and heartache, financial problems, even physical damage to our bodies. Because if you're in a codependent relationship dynamic in a chronic way over a long period of time, that's a high amount of stress placed on your body. When your worth, your approval, your acceptance belongs in the hands of another person, that's too much stress on the body, and the body's going to end up breaking down. So the cost for codependency ends up getting paid by compassionate people on a variety of levels, even down to our physical health. And I'm here for the compassionate people, which is you. That's us. And while we have a lot of things going for us, we compassionate people have weak spots. And no one's coming to fix them. A tendency to codependency is one of our weak spots. Hey, a tendency to codependency. That could be a band name. But it's true. A tendency to codependency is one of our big weak spots. We have to fix this. We have to shift this. It's not our fault it happens. We are not choosing it. We are not trying to do it, but we are stuck in it. We are falling into this. Actually, let me rephrase that. I want to make it a little bit more personal. If you've been resonating with what I've been saying, I want you to hear this for you. Codependency, it is not your fault it happens. You are not choosing codependency. You are not trying to do it, but you are falling into it. And unless you do something about it, codependency is going to keep eating you for lunch. And you're cute, so I could see why it would want you for lunch. You're a whole snack and more. But you are not here to be lunch for codependency. You are here for so much more than that. Codependency is an energy drain on you. Now, can codependency be good for something? Actually, yes. Codependency can be a classroom where you can learn some very valuable things about being a human on this planet who has a compassionate heart. As in, how not to do it. The classroom of codependency is here to show you you have got to find your boundaries. That's the primary goal of the curriculum in the classroom of codependency. That boundaries are not a maybe for people like us, they are a must. And you get to graduate from this classroom of codependency the second you decide to go on your boundaries journey, which is really cool. And that's also why in this episode and in the coming ones, I want to break down codependency for you. We just looked a bit at the history of it. Let's talk more in the episode to come about why it happens, what it costs, and more importantly, what compassionate people can do to begin finding freedom. Because in my opinion, it's time to leave this classroom. The classroom has had its day. Compassionate people have been in this classroom for long enough. It's time. We got to grow out of this. And if you're ready, by the way, to go on a boundaries journey right now, you don't have to wait. I invite you to explore working with me because you don't have to suffer and hurt and stumble around trying to figure this out for years and years and years still. There is a way. It's a lot easier than you might think. And I would absolutely love to help you if you want that. If you want that. But whatever you choose and however you choose it, please note this. I am so glad you are here. Thank you for listening. And remember, love is the way. And you are worthy. You. Yes, you. You are worthy of that same love you so easily give to everyone else. I'll see you next time. My compassionate friend, I am so glad you're with us. We are the compassionate revolution. We are the change the world needs, and we're becoming it. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or give this podcast a 5-star review. I'd appreciate it so much. And if you'd like to get practical and work with me more closely on boundaries, you can come visit me at boundaried.com. That's boundaried with a D.com for amazing resources. Because this is how we do it. One action at a time. We are moving into our power. And I'm so proud to be in this movement with you.